Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Thank you for tuning into another Supatease video. And with some time now having passed in patch 9.1 and a ton of updates coming through with new honor talents and balance changes, I just wanted to give an update on my rankings for the melee DPS when it comes to competitive PvP in World of Warcraft. So this is going to be a good list for you if you're interested in knowing what's meta at the moment, if you want to play for the meta, if you want to pick the underdog specializations, what type of compositions are looking good, what's looking fun. This is just going to be a general overview of all of the melee DPS specializations available and providing you with as much insight as I can. Right now, with the current brawl that's available, the comp stomp, you can actually gear a character up pretty rapidly. You are going to be getting around 500 honor per 5 minutes and actually 1 renown level pretty much every single battleground. I've been catching up my demon hunter using this method throughout this week, and you have until the next reset to really take advantage of it. This is the fastest amount of honor that I've seen, the fastest amount of renown that I've seen, and you're kind of doing PvP. I mean, you're in a Arathi Basin and you're fighting against AI, and so if you're really under geared, you're still going to have at least a good time playing in that environment, whereas if you're playing in the other random battleground formats and you're completely under geared, you might get smashed a lot. You won't feel that as much. So right now is a really good time actually to take advantage of that and catch up a character if you want an alt, or maybe try and re-roll to something. Maybe something didn't work out for you on a specialization. And I'm going to be taking into consideration like viability. So I've broken this down into meta, solid, limited, average, likely unpopular, but it's kind of an average performance, and then play at your own risk. Meta means that pretty much everything is revolving around you. Solid means that you pair excellently with the meta picks, or you have some other options available to you, but it's not really like the entire game is revolving around you. Limited means that your spec is good, but only within a certain domain. So you have a limited amount of compositions. It doesn't mean that your spec is bad in any means. It just means that you may want to only focus on a specific amount of compositions if you want success. And then average means that you'll probably struggle, but they're getting to be into a better spot. So let's just get started here with the warrior. I think that this has been a pretty common pick for most people to go up into the meta slot. Intervene was recently nerfed to only last 3 seconds, down from 6. This has allowed rogues a little bit more competitive viability against Arms Warrior, but you still have so much extra utility in your toolkit and a massive amount of damage available. And it's actually one of the few specializations that you can pretty much play any covenant. At the moment, Kyrian appears to be the kind of go-to for aggression, now with the new legendary providing Spear of Bastion in 8-second duration, pinning a target down in one place for 8 seconds. Or you Necro Lord for defense, or these big mastery hits. I'm seeing that a little bit more with Ret Paladins paired up with Arms Warriors. And then if you were Venthyr, you can probably still stay Venthyr. I mean, Condemn is still going to do a lot of damage. And then Night Fae can be a good pickup into counter melee cleaves as a warrior. And there are a lot of melee cleaves, but that's one is a little bit more specialized. I would say that Kyrian's probably the safe one to go for. At the moment, as an Arms Warrior, you're really not going to have any problem finding competitive arena teams. You dominate 2v2, you dominate 3v3. Having Sharpened Blade and Rated Battlegrounds is a very important toolkit to have. So in competitive formats, you're going to have a really good time. In solo PvP, maybe not so much. So if you're more of like the random battleground player, or you're playing by yourself a lot, maybe not so much. But again, this is a competitive format. When you're under geared, this spec is not going to feel too great. So taking advantage of the comp stomp brawl to get through that gearing process is going to be important for you to try and get up to the point where you can start being more competitive in arena. But with sustainability through ignore pain, defensive stance for damage reduction, an overall amount of damage, and burst damage available, it has an incredibly well-rounded toolkit. They did a phenomenal job with this specialization in Shadowlands. I know people are going to complain, well, it's so strong, it needs to be nerfed. In my reality, I would like to see the other specializations brought up to the same point that Arms Warrior currently is, because there's a ton of outplay potential, feels good outside of its cooldowns, feels good inside of its cooldowns. It's just an incredibly well-rounded specialization, and it's highly competitive, so I would definitely recommend it. Assassination Rogue, this is a specialization in my mind that is jumping up into the meta tier. because it's not just limited to Rogue Mage, although Rogue Mage Paladin is probably its best available comp. You can play this with Shadow Priest, Restoration Shaman. You can play this with Frost Mage, Resto Druid for more of a dampening oriented version of the Assassination Rogue composition. So you have options with it now. Having Hemotoxin is basically a sharpened blade mechanic for additional healing reduction on the target, and having Tricks of the Trade now available to empower your allies' damage is going to synergize so well with Mage that you are going to just do so much damage pretty much every kidney shot. You have high sustained pressure. It's going to be a really feels good specialization in 2v2, 3v3. And then in rated battlegrounds, bringing in Smoke Bomb as a utility is going to be a nice kind of desirability in that competitive format. In battlegrounds and solo content, much like the Arms Warrior, because you don't have this consistent output of healing, like Word of Glory on a Rep Paladin, you're pretty limited. You might not feel as strong as a solo PvP player in random battleground situations, although gear can make up for that. If you're fully geared in random battlegrounds, you can pretty much play any spec and you're going to smash. So if you're worried about that, once you get through the gearing process, again, take advantage of the comp stomp brawl, you're going to be in a solid spot. But Assassination Rogue is definitely a meta pick, and you're going to have some options in terms of your composition choice and your partners, which is important when you're trying to find teams as well, because it can be a bit of a struggle to find partners. So it is important to have options. Enhancement Shaman, for me, this might be a bit of a controversial placement for Enhancement Shaman, but for me, I'm feeling like Enhancement Shaman is more... What did I just try and move? Enhancement Shaman is feeling more like limited. And what I mean by that is that there's a lot more mortal wounds effects to kind of overwhelm the Enhancement Shaman. And it's the main reason that I think that it's limited is not because it's bad. It does an insane amount of healing. You can do as much healing as healers. You've got big one-shot zaps and one-taps. The main reason that I think that it's limited is that I've pretty much only exclusively seen this specialization played with an Arms Warrior. You do synergize effectively with the Arms Warrior, but the Arms Warrior has other choices as well. You could play with a Windwalker. That's another composition I've seen, but you're really not seeing Enhancement Shaman with any spellcasters. It's really just that one type of melee cleave. 2v2 is all right. You don't have a Mortal Wounds effect, and your defense is limited to a lot of the really good specializations available in 2v2. Not really wanted in rated battlegrounds, so competitively, I would have to say that it's kind of limited. If you have friends to run that Warrior Healer Enhancement Shaman composition, you will have a good time with the specialization. If you don't, might not have the best time. Now, in random battleground content, you'll feel pretty good because you'll be able to heal yourself and run into big fights and one-shot people. So if you want to do that type of stuff, it will be really good in that environment. But again, it's a competitive tier list. Just wanted to put that out there on the table, though, in case it might change your mind on your selection. Now, Feral Druid, this is another specialization in 9.1 that I think has established itself as a meta pick. And the main reason that I think that it's a meta pick is that you're seeing it playing with more specializations, right? Jungle is its best composition, the Hunter Feral Healer, but you can run with Warriors, you can run with Shadow Priests, I've seen, and you have a little bit of flexibility now in your options. Would be curious to see it tried out with Rep Paladin maybe, or even Demon Hunter, or maybe even a Windwalker or something like that. We haven't seen very much expanded creativity for the specialization, but I think that it could have options. And the main reason that it's currently meta is that it's a very impossible specialization to kill. It does a tremendous amount of overall damage and a tremendous amount of overall healing, and has a lot of support and utility for the team. So it's fitting into a similar boat as the Arms Warrior, where you're going to feel really good, have a lot of outplay potential, a lot of room to grow on the specialization. I'd say that it's probably initially harder to play than a lot of specs in the game, but that means that you'll have a lot of room to grow on it, and it's really good in the solo PvP content. So if you're doing like random battlegrounds or dueling, because of its innate tankiness and ability to heal and mobility, you'll have a really good time in those environments. So if you want to play something that's good basically all around, it's going to be a great pick. Not so popular in rated battlegrounds, so maybe if you're a rated battleground player, you may want to avoid it there. But if you run the Convoke the Spirits, maybe you get a spot. It's kind of tough, though. A lot of Feral Druids are opting for Necrolord for competitive formats, but it's definitely a meta pick, and you're going to have options, and you'll feel really good on it. Frost Death Knight, again, this might be another controversial pick, but it seems like the popularity of Death Knight is going down, which I was very surprised to see. I was expecting Frost Death Knight to have a lot of synergies with the pre-existing melee DPS, and we have occasionally seen it pop up with Warrior Death Knight in tournament format, but not nearly as much as I had thought. Like, I mean, even Mez has re-rolled to Warrior, But I was very surprised that we don't see the Death Knight Warrior nearly as much, because I think that it is a good composition. That's probably your best composition as a Death Knight. You could run with the Demon Hunters. That's a great pick as well for just overall pressure, or the Windwalkers for overall pressure. It's going to be a strong class, but it's limited in its options, which is why I feel like it's a limited pick at the moment. This does not necessarily mean that it's a bad pick. It's had its Death Strike healing buffed up recently, so it's going to be more durable overall. It still brings in a ton of cleave damage. The whole strategy of gripping targets together and then blowing people up in a combo is the basic premise for the Frost Death Knight. So it works in that niche, but outside of that niche, you're not going to have too many options. So for me, it's limited, but strong in its current limitations. Probably has more options than Enhancement Shaman in terms of classes that it can play with. So maybe it's a bit better than Enhancement Shaman. We'll just put it there a little bit ahead of it. For me, I think that it's likely drop down maybe a bit just because its popularity is not seen, but I would recommend the Warrior Death Knight healer comp in solo PvP because you have Death Strike to heal yourself. You're going to be more sustainable, so you'll have a good time there. It's really good to have a Frost Death Knight in rated battlegrounds for the AoE grips into the big AoE stuns. You're going to be setting up combos for your team. You'll feel strong in the battleground scenarios. 2v2, you'll feel all right, but there's a lot of other specializations I think that are stronger currently in 2v2, and then in 3v3 you've got those limited choices. So it's definitely limited at the moment, but it's strong in its limitations. Fury Warrior, I gotta say, it's still play at your own risk. And the main reason for this is because you're just directly competing with Arms Warrior, which is just, it seems like defensive stance is going to be a more powerful or potent option than what Fury Warrior has in terms of its own personal defense at the moment. But the sustained damage buffs have definitely made it better in 2v2, but even in 2v2, Arms is still better than you. If you want to be like a solo PvP player, you will have more sustainability on yourself than Arms Warrior, so maybe if that's the route you want to go as a warrior, it would be good for that. But competitive formats, you're not really desirable in rated battlegrounds, not really desirable in 3v3 over Arms Warriors. I've yet to see any real specific comps come out with Arms Warrior in 3v3. It's really only been in 2v2, and even then most of the warriors are shifting back to Arms. So it's tough for me to recommend it in a competitive format. But again, as a solo PvP player, as a warrior, maybe you flip between Arms and Fury for random battlegrounds or something in your free time, and that's where it's going to fit. But it's still, in my mind, to play at your own risk in terms of being able to find partners. You're going to struggle with it. And then everybody's just going to be telling you, why aren't you Arms? Demon Hunter, for me, I feel like Demon Hunter is coming into a spot on the solid tier. You're getting a lot more options in your compositions because you have Mortal Wounds now. You can apply it through your Blade Dance, so it's going to be a great pick-me-up for that. You're doing a tremendous amount of overall damage. You still have the Hunt Burst. You've got good sustainability. It's just an all-around feels-good specialization. You're going to feel strong in 2s. You're going to feel strong in 3s. You're going to feel strong in rated battlegrounds. You're going to feel strong in solo PvP. This is the main reason that I'm picking it up as a specialization. And when you press the Hunt, you literally feel like a Gundam just flying through the air and zapping somebody. So I wanted to feel what that felt like, which is why I'm going for it. But I don't know if I can say that it's meta defining, mostly because it's less popular, which is surprising because it's an easier spec to play initially. So usually specs that are easier to play are generally more popular overall, but it's not seen as much in competitive formats. You have a little bit more flexibility in my mind, which is why it's not limited to play with ranged DPS or to play melee cleaves. And because of that, I think that it's a tier above limited. It's in solid, but you're not going to have everybody kind of like seeking you out as a Demon Hunter. You can pretty much mesh with almost anything in the game. But again, you're not the most desirable, but it is the most well-rounded in my mind for a specialization at the moment, which is why it comes in at the solid tier. Outlaw Rogue, for me, again, Outlaw Rogue is kind of just fallen into this spot where it's just unpopular. I think that within the composition of Rogue Mage, you could still make it work, but you're going to compete with Assassination, which is just clearly above, and you're going to be competing with Subtlety, which it's kind of a direct competition, like setting up burst damage in a stun, but it doesn't reset as well as Subtlety. Takes a little bit longer to get stuns going. It just hasn't really fit into a spot where I'm seeing it a ton in the meta, so it's definitely unpopular, but I would say that it's average. You're probably bumping into the limited tier though as well, because you're only going to be able to play with mages and healers. You may have more fun with Outlaw in random battlegrounds or solo PvP content, but I think Subtlety probably even comes out ahead there. You're probably not desirable in rated battlegrounds comparatively to the other rogue specializations. The 1v1's not as good as Sub Rogue, and then the mortal wounds pressure from assassination, but again, probably sub for rated battlegrounds. For me, it's just average. The buffs that have come through for it haven't really put it in a spot where I've seen it a huge amount. Mind you, playing in an MMORPG, it can be very difficult to just switch to Outlaw, right? You got to get the legendary, you got to get the conduits, maybe you have to level the character if you haven't leveled it. So a shift in terms of meta is really hard to find unless a spec is just clearly leaps and bounds now the better spec to play. Players will have hesitancy to switch over just because of the amount of investment, right? You have to invest into the spec that maybe it's better. That could have some contribution to why it's unpopular. It feels better in 2v2. You're certainly going to have a better time there. But competing with Subtlety and Assassination is just, it's too much of a competition in my mind to see it in a super competitive format, but it's doing better. Rep Paladin, this is a pretty easy one for me. Meta, a Rep Paladin can play with a lot of options in the game. It can play with casters. It can play with melee DPS. I would say that it's most noted playing with melee cleaves. And again, much like the Feral Druid, it's because it brings a lot of immediate burst damage, a lot of sustained damage, a lot of overall healing and support and utility for the team. It's more of a defense and support oriented melee DPS in my mind. So if you're wanting to go for that kind of element or vibe, you're going to get that much more out of it than something like an Assassination Rogue. So there's a distinct vibe difference between them. But being able to just completely eradicate people out of arena with your cooldowns is going to be a great option. Probably my number one recommendation for solo PvP. You're going to have an insane time carrying players as well on Rep Paladin. So if you're somebody who wants to be able to just pug and you want to be able to carry somebody, Rep Paladin is the spec that you're going to want to play with. But it's also a great specialization if you want to invest in the long term on a team. If you're playing with an arms warrior and a healer and you want to work on your synergy together and work towards some of the higher tier rewards, you've got that as an option as well. It's incredibly well rounded, powerful, and potent at the moment, and it synergizes with a lot of different compositions, which is why it falls into the meta tier. Subtlety Rogue, similarly here, maybe some people will not agree with me here, but the main reason that it's coming into limited is not, again, because it's bad. It is because you were pretty much exclusively playing one comp. You were playing with a mage and a fire mage, and you were playing with a healer. You're really not going to see any flexibility. You're not playing with warlocks. You're not playing with pretty much anything else in the game. If you're playing with a shadow priest, you need to be assassination. It doesn't have any options outside of that one specific comp. If you want to run into battlegrounds, really fun specialization to just completely erase people and then duck out of the fight. Really good in that environment, really good in rated battlegrounds for the same reason. It's all right in 2v2, but you're limited to this kind of burst, hit, and run play style. So if you like that, going in for your big hits and then trying to escape and then going back in, it will fit into that niche, but that is all you've got. That's all your cards, which is why it's limited. And then in 3v3, you will be very successful within the realm of that composition, the rogue mage healer. But outside of that, you will struggle to find teammates, you will struggle to find partners, and you may experience a couple people saying, why aren't you just assassination? Because assassination can be a bit more straightforward and overwhelm teams in situations where subtlety needs to have this kind of perfect setup moment. So if you're interested in learning those strategies for setup and trying to advance as a team, you'll have a good time with it. If you're pugging a lot and trying to play competitively, probably not. If you want to just be a random battleground solo player, it's probably an all right time. Now, Survival Hunter, this is another specialization that's pretty tough to pinpoint. It's doing a lot better than it has been throughout this expansion, but you're directly competing with Beast Mastery, which is just doing so much more damage and having the ability to run away while doing damage, where Survival's kind of get in your face a little bit more. It falls behind BM. I'm struggling really between Solid and Limited, mostly because we really only see Survival Hunter competitively played with Feral Druid, and not really anything else, which would then fit into the category of a limited pick, right? It's definitely not meta. You don't have everybody seeking you out. But I have seen some interesting compositions like Shadow Priest Hunter attempted as Survival. It's still kind of where BM is better. So maybe it is a fair assessment that Survival comes in at limited. It's not a bad specialization anymore by any means, but you will only really see a true amount of success playing with Feral Druid and playing with a healer. And that would be my #1 recommendation. Much like the other compositions in this tier, that is the main reason you're here. It's not because you're inherently bad, it's just you have a specific niche or a specific comp that only works, or you have other specializations that you share a class with that are just performing in almost every other situation better than you. So it just puts you in this place where it's like, you could be playing BM. So it might be a bit awkward. For random battlegrounds, getting in your face as Survival Hunter, not really the best time. It's got decent 1v1, but team fight potential is low. Rated battleground desirability is low. So if those are other things you want to take into consideration, you may want to opt out of the Survival Hunter for those reasons. Unholy Death Knight, the specialization actually just got another round of buffs. I would say for Unholy Death Knight, it's probably... Whoa, what did I just do? Our tier list is going on an adventure. I'm stuck. We can't put him in. He's average. He's average unpopular. Okay, we can't put him down. I don't know what's happened to my screen. We can try and fix it. Doesn't look like we can fix it. So here we go. He's average, likely unpopular. He's been getting a lot of buffs for the Unholy Death Knight, but it's still kind of like you don't have the niche of Frost Death Knight, which is really important at the moment in the meta for executing for kills. You're going to need a lot of dampening in your matches to be able to win. I've encountered it a couple of times now, and it seems like it's just a very dampening oriented specialization because it just lacks the punch to be able to close a game out at the moment. You have more options than Frost in my mind. You can play with ranged DPS or melee DPS. You won't be better than Frost with the melee DPS, but you have more flexibility, and you may have a better time in solo PvP because you don't have the restriction of needing 2 targets next to each other to do the most amount of effective damage. But it has a ton of ramp on its burst. Its burst cooldowns are a lot longer than a lot of other classes of currently available. You're a little bit more survivable with the Death Strike buffs, but a lot of the specs now have Mortal Wounds to put you kind of back in your place after those buffs. So you're gonna kind of struggle with it. I really wish that I could fix this. I've never had this happen before. But now looking at Windwalker, we can't put him down either. But I would say that Windwalker actually jumps up into meta. And the main reason for this is because of the spinning crane kick. The spinning crane kick just absolutely KOs people. You do so much burst damage with it. I've seen so many one-shots where people just disappearing 100-0. You have flexibility. You can play melee cleaves. You can play with ranged. You got great 1v1, great random battleground potential. I would say maybe rated battlegrounds is where you become a little bit less desirable. Great 2v2, great 3v3, and you're going to have a ton of options and flexibilities. This specialization is probably more desirable than a lot of your other options because of its flexibility. And you're always directly competing with Warrior. It seems like Rogue, Windwalker, and Warriors all hate each other because they're always just competing for their dominant spot. But in my mind, they all have a niche and they all have a place and they all have a different play style. Windwalker, again, is more about the combo burst setups, a little bit less about the sustained damage that Warrior Assassination brings. So it's going to have that distinct element to it that the other melee DPS don't bring to the table. So take that into consideration. You're more fragile. If you get caught in bad positions, it can be devastating for Windwalker, but if you're aware of that and you're using your mobility effectively, that's where the fun is going to be found for you on that specialization. So this is my updated tier list for 9.1 for the melee DPS and PvP. I hope that you enjoyed it. If you liked it, please leave the video with a thumbs up. Comment down below with your thoughts here going into 9.1. What are you doing? Are you going to be gearing up any alts? Are you looking to re-roll? I'd love to hear in the comments down below. And other than that, thank you very much for watching the video. I will see you in the next one.